Good evening, everyone. This is Dr. Deborah Jenkins, your host for Black Talk Platform. Black Talk Platform, where we speak about everything having to do with the Black community, and that has an effect on that same community, our community. We are fully and wholly responsible for everything that takes place within the confines of the Black community. It doesn't matter if you're in New York City, if you're in Miami, Florida. If you are a part of the Black community, then you and I have a responsibility not only to those individual communities, but we also have a responsibility to each other. We speak about subjects ranging from faith, justice, finance, business, and otherwise. Unfortunately, for the nearly year and a half that Black Talk Platform has been a part of the independent Black media that is springing up, we have had to spend an excessive amount of time talking about justice. Justice as it relates to police violence against our community. That has consumed most of the conversations held here at Black Talk Platform. But I have to admit something that very few will. And I am not here to indict anyone other than myself as a media personality. We have, to great peril, left some conversations for others to have. That ends with me today. That conversation is the amount of violence occurring within our community. The violence that I'm speaking about is not violence at the hands of law enforcement in this case. To be sure, they still must be held accountable. And we, again, the Black community, is wholly responsible for ensuring that that accountability is enduring. But the accountability that I am speaking about and the violence that I am speaking about this evening is the violence that is perpetrated against our communities by our own. Recently, here in New York City, over the last month in particular, there has been an outrageous amount of crime occurring, specifically from young people who are using our streets, the very streets that we don't want the cops to protect, quote unquote, the very same streets that we are calling for the abolition of the NYPD, the very streets that we are calling for defunding the police. These streets are being ravaged by youth violence. And I want to talk about that violence. Again, understand, if you go back and look at all of the recordings of Black Talk Platform since May of 2000, you will see me time and time again, holding not only the NYPD accountable for the harm that they are causing our community, but law enforcement in general and at the very top levels, as high as the FBI. So this is not an apologetics conversation. No one would ever accuse me of being that person. In fact, you have enough activists, civil rights leaders, television personalities, entertainers. You go on, I can go on. The list seems endless as to those who are willing to, in some way, make apologies for what law enforcement does to our community. So I'm not that person. And if you know anything about me and have been following my show, Black Talk Platform, you already know that that is not me. I am not afraid to hold anyone accountable. And that accountability begins with myself. A couple of weeks ago, I was invited to a meeting of clergy to discuss a clergy response to the violence taking place in our city. And honestly, I have to say, and I have to remain true to who I am. And this will not sit well with many, especially those who may have been a part of that conversation and may be watching this tonight. If you followed me for any amount of time, you know that I am an activist. You also know that I have called and rallied and sponsored rallies and marches and you name it. I've done all of that. But for the sake of those of you who do not know me and are unfamiliar with my work in the community, let me share that I made a vow to myself and my family after the murder of Philando Castile that I would no longer participate in marches and rallies as I had done up until that point. Because here's a man who did absolutely everything that we are instructed to do as citizens when we are approached by law enforcement. And he still ended up dead. So I realized then that for those who want to continue to march and rally, I'm happy to let them do that. And I'm polite in refusing to take part in those exercises because I see very little fruit as a result of them. Oh, sure, you might get every major newspaper and every major news outlet to cover these rallies and these marches. But the results for our communities, the results for the families who have been harmed by law enforcement still remain a void that has not been fulfilled or filled rather by these marches and rallies. And so I choose to use my time in other ways. I am a policy person by academic training and previous professional work. And that is a strength for me. I am able to look at what is happening or what is presented to us on the surface, and I'm able to dive deep into it to see where there is benefit to be sought or to be had by our community and where policies need to be changed. Well, as a clergy person, I sit before you this evening, putting on my clergy policy hat and realizing that one more march in protest of the violence that is ravaging our community will not benefit the community, in my opinion. And here are a couple of reasons I'd like to share with you as to why I believe that those exercises are in futility. First, the church, even before I'm sorry, I am pre-recording this, and so I received a call and I had to take it. So hopefully it's not too choppy for you and that you will still be able to get the information as I intend for it to be transferred to you. But I'm going to take a praise break there and say thank you, Father, for the ability to pre-record, because there are situations that will occur in all of our lives that will prevent us from going live, but this will be viewed broadcast live. Okay, so what I was saying is that here are the reasons for me personally not believing that there's much fruit to be had, other than for those who need to feel as if they're doing something to respond to violence. Prior to COVID, there had been a mass exodus of young people from the church as actual members of the church. To be sure, churches lose young people every year to college and relocation. Those are the expected losses. But if you put those in a category to themselves, you will then be able to see that young people are just no longer attracted to the church. And so understanding that, And it's for many and various reasons. That is a show in and of itself, and their points are valid. The Bible talks about not trying to put new wine in old wineskins, but rarely does the church examine itself when we're trying to, again, regurgitate the very same things that did us well. They did us well when we were growing up, but we did not grow up. We, being many of the church leaders of the 21st century, we did not grow up with the internet and social media. And so therefore, we have to be able to re-examine how we're trying to transfer the gospel message to young people. They resoundingly tell us every day that they do not take part in any activities or services that we provide for the community, that we're not doing a good enough job. So in my opinion, why would I want to gather with clergy, many of whom never come outside of their church walls when these tragedies are happening in our community, to speak to our young people, to offer any admonition? And they deserve, in many cases, to be admonished for their behavior. But if they deserve to be admonished for their behavior, then we deserve to be admonished for ours. We have left them unattended. We have left them uncared for. Jesus is close to the young. He says it more than once, but nevertheless, we have fallen often into a trap of pandering to the tithe and offering members of our congregations. And it has not served our young people well. And so what happens is you have young people often marauding up and down streets. And that's why it's, in my opinion, so easy for certain clergy to lock hands with the NYPD against our young people when called upon to indict them, because we're so far removed from the pain that our young people are in. And much of that pain, had we been ministering to their spirits and their souls in the way that someone once ministered to ours, and in the way that Christ would have us, we would be less hesitant, we would be less ready to run and stand with the cops against our young people. So I don't believe it's effective to gather as clergy and chastise people, young people in this case, who really have no connection to us or our churches. They don't respect us. They will murder in front of the church. They will curse you out in front of the church. And in some cases, you have to be willing to default to respect is given when it's also received. This is me talking about myself. Anyone else who might hear this and may be clergy, you can take it or leave it, but this is me speaking about my own position. And the position that I believe should be taken by all clergy. And I am not forcing anyone, and I do not have the authority or power to make anyone do as I will do or I am doing. But the position that I believe that clergy should take is one of repentance. We are very quick to tell others that they need to repent. But young people need to sometimes hear that we're not perfect as clergy and that we have failed them. And some will accept that repentance and apology, and others will not. And that is when Matthew chapter 10, when Jesus tells us, shake the dust, shake the dust. When you try in earnest to make amends for your failures and for mine. It doesn't cost me anything to tell young people that as a clergy person, I know I felt them. And yes, I do what I do for young people, but in a very larger sense, I, like many of you, have jumped on the bandwagon of every national case, leaving my own community uncovered by the same amount of energy that I give to the Breonna Taylors, to the George Floyds, to the Ahmaud Arbery's, to the Philando Castile. The list goes on and on. For those of you who are not in the New York City area, I would like to share, and even for those of you who are, I would like to share what our city has been experiencing during the last month. I'm just going to share a few clips. This is for educational purposes only. There are no copyright infringements intended, but this is just purely for the purpose of sharing with my audience what's been going on in terms of crime here in New York City during the last month. This is the cover of the New York Post, October 1st. It is entitled, "Too Young to Die. 21 kids killed in New York City street violence so far this year." That was October 1st. Today is October 18th. That number has likely risen. Look at these beautiful faces. Look at these beautiful faces of the 21 young people who have lost their lives thus far in 2021. Their names are listed, and I'm going to attempt to call them all with respect. Xavier Wilson, Amaris Valdez, Jaron Elliott, Tony Lovick, Tony DeVell Boyd, Ramon Gill, Kimur Paran Mendez, Khalik Greer, Jarian Elliott. Well, he's named twice here. Jaquan Gauze, Jaden Tumich, Gerardo Rivez, Devontae Lewis, Cahill Pennington, Byron Sanan, Ethan Borges, all succumb to New York City street violence this year. Let me read excerpts from this article. Parenthetically, let me state, I am not a fan of the New York Post. And so in reading this article, there may be some things that I am hesitant to read because of the angle from which they often present their so-called journalism. But the fact that they have taken time to put these beautiful Black and brown young people on the front page of their newspaper, I will give them kudos. The city's deadliest scourge of street violence has claimed at least 21 children so far this year, more than triple the number for the same period in both 2019 and 2020. Did you hear that? That number of 21 is more than triple the number for the same period in both 2019 and 2020, according to a New York Post analysis of NYPD data. This year's grim figure involves kids between the ages of 10 and 17 who were killed either by gun or knives between January and September 30. By comparison, the NYPD reported 6 children under the age of 18 shot to death in the first 9 months of 2020, while in 2019, 5 were slain in gun violence and stabbing. the numbers show. I am left with a hole in my heart that I don't know how to explain, said Juliana Gope Sanan, whose 17-year-old son, Brian Saran, was struck by a stray bullet when he was fatally shot on a Brooklyn street one Saturday morning in March. Those nights I think about how I will never see my son. I just break down, the 49-year-old mother told the Post on Friday. Innocent kids are being killed in the street. Innocent kids are being killed in the streets. Let me show you their pictures again. Because for some people, we need to put a face to the sorrow that we are willing to share with those who are in need. Now, let me switch over to this long list of videos about the violence that is plaguing our city. 2 weeks ago, a boy was fatally wounded in Brooklyn. He is the 6th teen shot in 3 days across New York City. This was dated September 30th. A 19-year-old shot in the head, critically injured in Brooklyn. This was dated October 1st. Police seeks young boy in Bronx playground shooting that injured 13-year-old. This was dated October 10th. It is my understanding that they have now apprehended a 13-year-old for this shooting. A 16-year-old girl shot, critically injured near Brooklyn playground, October 1st. This is done by WPIX News. I believe this morning I saw this young girl's mother on WPIX stating how she is recovering well, and to the surprise and amazement of all of the medical staff. And she gave much praise to God for the recovery. Their family has been connected with an organization, I believe it's called Trellis in Brooklyn. The founder is also a pastor. He happened to be on the scene when her daughter was shot, and he felt compelled to do something for this young lady and her family. And with the help of the God Squad under the leadership of Pastor Gil Montrose, this family is on the mend. In fact, the young girl is anxious to get back to school. That's a blessing that she did not lose her life, but she should have never been shot. This may be the same story right here. Boy 16 fatally shot in the Bronx after 3 recent gun arrests. A 16-year-old boy who was fatally shot on a Bronx street 3 weeks after being arrested for carrying a gun. Nasaya was shot in the chest and head on East 187th Street near Clinton Avenue in Crotona about 12:50 p.m. on Wednesday. I think I've shared enough of the tragedy that has befallen our streets at the hand of young people primarily, and the victims are themselves young people. If I can find, before this airing, the name of the pastor and executive director of Trellis. I will add it in case anyone wants to support the mission that they have at their organization, which is now helping this 16-year-old girl who is on her way to recovery after being shot innocently. I will include that for you. You have seen Pastor Gil Montrose on my show before. Listen, I've watched clergy be jealous of one another. Pastor Gil Montrose is doing the work in Brooklyn. He and his God Squad, they are out there on the streets when many of us are sleeping, including myself. They are doing the work. So what I believe is most effective is the kind of work that Pastor Gil does with God Squad. His is not the only example, but it's one that is extremely effective. And what would better serve our young people is that if we were able to attend some of his trainings, all of his trainings are free and offered to the clergy. It has nothing to do with denomination. These nonsensical games is why our children are dying. Oh, because he's this denomination and I'm that denomination. Who cares? Young people do not care what denomination you and I are. They want to know that the clergy that claim to care about them truly care. And so if there's a proven model, such as the one that Pastor Gil uses, and he continues to tweak his own model, he continues to build upon what he's already presented. He's not resting on what worked yesterday, because he understands that as the violence increases, new methods are required. His trainings are free. I will put at the end of this video, in fact, I will put it in the descriptor so that you will know as clergy, as lay people, how to get involved with staving off this violence in our community. So yes, I'll catch flack for saying that I'm not a part of the defund the police movement. I'm not a part of the abolish the police movement. Not because I have some allegiance to law enforcement. I do not. But what I do is expect for them to do their job, the job that we've hired them to do as tax-paying members of our cities and of our country. And if they fail to do that, then they need to be held accountable. But sadly, and I have Black Talk platform episodes that talk about the origins of law enforcement in this country. So if you go and go through all of my videos that are archived over on YouTube, you look for Law Enforcement 101 and Law Enforcement Part 2, you will see the origins. It was right after the Emancipation Proclamation, because white people had this great fear of Blacks rising up. What I would love to see us do as a Black community is rise up and take our streets back from these young people who are killing each other because they are hurting and we have left them unattended. A friend of mine often views this show, who works at ACS, the Administration for Children's Services. He knows full well the work that they do brings them into many situations that are unsafe. And many times they have to investigate cases of maltreatment and abuse, but in so doing, they uncover gang activity, criminal activity, young people. This type of work as a police officer and as a child protective investigative officer, these are not for the faint of heart, but for the clergy. We have a greater responsibility to the entire community. And it starts with us getting trained. If you don't know, if you've been doing this 20, 30, 40 years, and you don't know how to reach young people, I implore you, reach out to Pastor Gil and the God Squad located in Brooklyn. They are doing the work. There's no need for us to reinvent the wheel. Go attend their trainings. They probably also have them archived. Pastor Gill is not in this for himself. He is in it to build up the clergy. So no, I will not participate in a clergy gathering to admonish young people. But what I will continue to do is encourage all clergy to reach out to people like Pastor Gill and to attend his trainings that are offered free every month. Sometimes he has summits and conferences, and those are a little more extensive. And he brings people in from throughout the country to test out best practices and what we can include here in New York City. But it's really time out for deciding we want to chastise young people when we're not doing our own job. Young people bear a lot of responsibility, and so do their parents. But every time we walk past, clutching our purses, with our hands in our pockets, ignoring what we see clearly happening, that someone will say, I can't stand her, but she's telling the truth. How much longer do you think you have the older people who are keeping your churches afloat? If you can't sincerely help these young people because you know that they deserve more, then do it for the probability of them one day giving back to your church and keeping your church afloat. I dedicate this episode to my dear friend and mentee, Leilani Lopez, as she just learned of the loss. She just lost her husband on yesterday to a tragic car accident. I would ask everyone who's ever seen her on my show, and she's been on more than once, to please keep her and her family in prayer as she tries to navigate this thing called life without the love of her life, Mr. James Lopez. Pray for her and keep her and her family in prayer, and I believe we will all be blessed for doing that. God bless you all, and I hope to be back with you live next week for another episode of Black Talk Platform. Please support independent Black media. My newest venture is SableNetwork.tv. Please consider becoming a subscriber for $9.99 per month, $99.99 annually, or $59.95 or $59.99 biannually. Support independent Black media because we focus on the stories that make a difference on your street every day. God bless you. And until I see you again, this has been Dr. Deborah D. Jenkins, your host for Black Talk Platform.